This has been a very, very difficult year for me and for millions of us, probably including you, depending on what sort of tragedies existed in your life, aside from COVID-19 and the confinement and the loss of human interactions. In addition to all that, so many of us have had additional personal anguish to deal with this year, myself included. And it's been rough. It's been very, very, very rough. There have been many moments when I wasn't able to contain the grief that I was feeling for stuff in my personal life, but also for what we were going through. Watching the orange bastard with his destruction, seemingly unstoppable. And then I have to admit the joy and relief when Biden won, and then when the two senators here in Georgia, two Democratic senators won. There have been moments like those, but the grief and the pain and the anguish and the fear of watching what this filthy animal did to the United States, this Donald Trump, and then the horror of January 6th. I mean, it just seemed to be an ending. The tragedies, the natural tragedies that we've experienced over the past 12 months, the fires, the floods, the storms, it just seemed unending, just no let up. And if you are an adult and you have responsibilities like so many of us do, you know how you have to keep that anguish sometimes in check, especially if you're a parent, because the children around you are using you as a gauge as to their level of fear or anxiety. You know, if mom or dad or both parents or whoever is raising the children, if they seem able to withstand whatever's happening, then I do believe, from having been a parent, that the kids pick up on that, and they find some comfort that they draw from the stability of a parent, and they're not as afraid. And I've experienced that time and time and time again in raising my children, and now especially with Molly. However, there are times, maybe after the kids are in bed, you've turned off the television because you can't watch anymore, when there are no, as limited as they are, distractions to refocus your attention, and all of a sudden you're left with your thoughts, right? We all go through this, I know. And the thoughts that we're left with, because of the nature of our being human, are not always positive. As a matter of fact, over this past year, they have been exceedingly negative for most of us. And they've been rooted in fear and disorganization and anxiety. Some of us can't even sleep. Some of us have a difficult time going to sleep. I have friends around the country who, in our communications with each other, tell me that it's just impossible to sleep. They'll fall asleep for an hour and wake up, or 2 hours and wake up, and they just can't seem to get to sleep. And in those moments is when, those moments are when we adults don't have to keep up the tension of a straight face, as my mother used to call it. And we can cry. You know, the children are in bed or the child is in bed. We're alone. It's quiet. There's no distraction. And the thoughts are there. And in those moments, the tears start to come. Now, I know I'm not unique in that. And I know a lot of people are suffering through the same stuff. And it's almost the kind of grief that you can't really identify as a singular cause of why you're crying. It's just an overarching feeling of grief, right? Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm sure you do. So I've had a bunch of those moments where when I wake up in the morning, my pillow might still be wet where I was crying, or during the day when I have to choke back the tears. Now, the reason I'm saying all this is because last night, right after Molly and I had dinner, I had the news on, MSNBC, and Joe Biden came on. And he gave his talk. And it was in commemoration of the fact that we have passed 500,000 people dead in this country from COVID-19. And prior to his coming out to speak, I believe it was around 6 o'clock, the Washington National Cathedral began ringing its bells 500 times in memory of the 500,000 who have died because of this disease. And at the same time, the American flag atop the White House was lowered to half staff. And then, about an hour later, Biden addressed the nation from the White House. And no sooner than had he begun than I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes. And there was no point trying to hold him back. And Molly had been, she's reading Gone with the Wind. Yes, she is. One of the first things she said to me, she knows the book. I mean, she knows the movie. But one of the first things she said to me when she was assigned the book was, "Daddy, there's over 500 pages." Yeah, well. So she put the book down and came over and sat on the arm of the easy chair where I was sitting in front of the television. She put her arm around my shoulders, and she could see the tears coming down my cheeks, because as soon as Biden started talking, it was almost like a release of all those tears that had built up because of so much death, so many frontline workers who have just absolutely dedicated every ounce of their soul, their spirit, their professional training in trying to take care of us over these overwhelming, unspeakable odds and tragedies that they've had to experience. You know, watching people die in ICUs, I'm totally alone. I know what that's like. Not that I've had a relative or a friend die in an ICU when I've been there, but I have spent time in an ICU when people were dying all around me. And I was there because of a person I knew was in an ICU. But it is not a pleasant thing to watch people die in an intensive care unit, because nobody can come in except the medical staff. I was there under certain circumstances, but to watch people die alone is a very sobering situation. And for the frontline workers, the doctors and nurses and medical people who have had to deal with this, to the measurement of over 500,000 people dying, I'm sure it's just unspeakable. I don't know how they're able to deal with it. You know, doctors and nurses, medical people are trained to save lives, not to stand back helplessly and watch people die, because there's absolutely nothing that can be done. All of that came out for me in what Biden had to say. And he started out by, I don't know if these were his first words, but he said, "Today we mark a truly grim, heartbreaking milestone. 500,071 dead. That's more Americans than those who have died in 1 year, the more Americans who have died in 1 year of this pandemic than in World War I, World War II, and Vietnam combined." And he was reading that figure off a small card he said he carried in his pocket every day with the updated total. Now, Biden could speak to this in a way that I don't think anybody else in a leadership position in this country could. And that's because of his empathy and his sympathy. He lost his first wife and daughter in a car smash-up in 1972. His oldest son, Bo, died in 2015 due to a brain tumor. And because of the death and the grief that Biden has experienced, he was able to speak personally to people who had suffered a loss in the pandemic. And I knew he wasn't talking directly to me because I have not lost someone to this point in this COVID-19 plague. In fact, I don't know in my extended circle of people who has died of COVID-19. I know several friends of mine who have died this year, but not because of COVID-19. Anyway, Biden went on to say, quote, "I know what it's like to not be there when it happens, someone's death. I know what it's like when you are there, holding their hands as they look into your eye and they slip away. That black hole in your chest, you feel like you're being sucked into it. And then the survivor's remorse, the anger, the questions of faith in your soul," end quote. And in his remarks then yesterday, he also reflected on the personal aspect of the pandemic. He told his audience to avoid seeing the victims as statistics and to speak directly to the grief experienced by those who felt the loss personally. This is why I say I can't think of another president of the United States in my lifetime who could have done this. Certainly not this orange bastard who so recently fled. Biden then said, quote, "For those who have lost loved ones, this is what I know. They're never truly gone. They'll always be part of your heart. I know this as well, and it seems unbelievable, but I promise you the day will come when the memory of the loved one you lost will bring a smile to your lips before a tear to your eye," end quote. Now that is as close to poetry, I think, as any president of the United States could possibly get. So in watching and listening to Biden last night, I just couldn't contain it any longer. And that's when Molly had to come over and sit next to me and put her arm around me because I started crying, not sobbing and, falling on the floor and grabbing for hankies or tissues, but a very easy flow of tears coming out of my eyes. And I really felt a sort of release, I guess, because Biden was standing there on national television and giving me permission to feel what I have been keeping locked up inside as best I could. And cynic that I am, there was a brief moment in last night's, I'll call it a meeting with Joe Biden, when I realized what a cold, emotionless, heartless bastard Donald Trump really was, and how I am so glad that he wasn't around. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. As you know, we've switched formats and are now broadcast exclusively on the Progressive Voices Network. So that means you get fewer program interruptions, no corporate commercials, and lots of profanity. But our format change also means some of our radio listeners no longer hear the program. It's been a while since I mentioned our podcasts, so you may have forgotten that there is a way to listen to this program anytime you need a good dose of screaming. Visit MikeMalloy.com and subscribe to our podcast. As a podcast subscriber, you can download the program to your mobile device and take me with you wherever you go. And if you have a friend who needs a dose of truth-seeking, you can give a gift subscription as well. That's MikeMalloy.com, and never miss a minute of the uncensored fun and frivolity.